Hello, everyone, and welcome to What's Wrong with the Podcast. Today, we're absolutely delighted to be speaking with Michaeleen Doucleff. Michaeleen is a global health correspondent for NPR's Science Desk and the author of the New York Times bestseller Hunt, Gather, Parent, which I'm also a huge fan of. The book describes a way of raising kind and confident children, which moms and dads all over the world have turned to for millennia. Doucleff has a doctorate in chemistry from the University of Berkeley, California, and a bachelor's degree in biology from Caltech. For the past decade, Doucleff has reported on disease outbreaks and children's health for NPR. Before that, Doucleff was an editor at the journal Cell, where she wrote about the science behind pop culture. She lives in San Francisco with her husband, daughter, and their German shepherd, Savanna. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our podcast. Today, we have the great pleasure of speaking with Michaeleen Doucleff. She's the author of Hunt, Gather, and Parent, and I'm a huge fan, so I've been very much looking forward to this conversation. Michaeleen, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So please tell us more about yourself and how you came to write this amazing book.
So I am actually a chemist by training. I spent 7 years as a chemist. I have a PhD in chemistry. And then I moved into science journalism. And I've been at National Public Radio for 9 years now, mostly covering disease outbreaks around the world. Before COVID, NPR would send me, to really far-flung places to investigate kind of exotic diseses. So I was in Liberia during the Ebola outbreak. I was actually in a Malaysian bat cave in 2017 doing a story about potential coronavirus outbreaks from bats.
Oh my God.
I know.
This was what year?
2017, we stood in this bat cave, and the scientist was like, yeah, there could be, he was telling us like there could be this massive global pandemic, and we were all just like, what? And then I think it was actually 2017 too, they sent me up to the Arctic to look at diseases inside permafrost. And this is viruses inside permafrost. And this is when I first started to kind of get an inkling of like, some things going on with our parenting, because up in the Arctic, I met a lot of Inuit families and saw that the parenting was really different. The following year, they sent me down to the Yucatan Peninsula to this little tiny Maya village to do a story about attention. There had been these studies about how Maya kids could pay attention better than American kids, European American kids in certain situations. And we were going to do a story on it. And we got down there, the producer and I. We spent about 4 or 5 days in people's homes with families, talking to moms mostly. And it kind of, what I saw and what these parents taught me kind of blew my mind. Like it really shifted my whole sense of like what parenting could be. First of all, like the moms, there was no yelling. There was no bickering, nagging. There was not any of this like kind of constant friction and resistance that I saw in the US and I was having with my own daughter. So I'll tell you about that in a second. It was just so smooth. Like it was just kind of like mutual respect. And yet the kids were like incredible. They were like generous to each other, to their parents. They shared voluntarily and they were super, super helpful. So one morning I was talking to this mom, Maria de Los Angeles, and she has, 5 kids, 3 young daughters, and they were on spring break and they had stayed up the night before watching a shark movie. And so they were sleeping in, and her 12-year-old daughter, Angela, wakes up, like kind of walks past me and her mom in the kitchen and starts washing the dishes from breakfast, like completely voluntarily. And I was just like so surprised. I was like, what just happened? And Maria was just like, well, she's 12. And she should know what to do by now, and she should do it. If she sees it, she does it. And I was super surprised, but she wasn't. She was like, this is what kids are supposed to do. And I actually sat in the airport, the Cancun airport, just kind of being like, what did I just see? Like, was it real? Like, could parenting really be that easy? Really is kind of what I felt. And I didn't think much about it. At the time, my little girl, Rosie, I have one daughter, Rosie, and she was 2.5, and she was really starting to have a lot of tantrums. And she's a great kid. She's smart and courageous, but she's always been very like fiery and, hot tempered and persistent. And she was starting to have these tantrums, and I was trying to do everything to help her to like stop them. And sometimes she would just like slap me across the face. She was also biting me at times, with this daughter that I really didn't know what to do with. And I didn't know how to help. And I had read like, blogs and books and tried all this stuff and just felt so frustrated. I felt like I kind of was hopeless at that point. I was like, this is just going to be our life. We were just going to have these power struggles, and, it just is the way it is. And then I saw, so here I was with this daughter that I didn't really know what to do with. And I saw these parents that seemed to not only be doing it better, but doing it in a way that was much easier, and just kind of all around different than what I had seen. And I went back and I did the stories on attention and everything. And I kind of kept this idea in the back of my mind that maybe there's something going on. But I thought maybe it was specific to the Maya community or this little village. And then about 6 months later, I went back up to the Arctic to do a story on anger. And I kind of saw the same thing. Like I saw this approach to parenting that was really calm, really gentle, no yelling, no screaming, and super, super effective again. The kids were generous and kind and respectful. And so here you have these two really different places, right? In the Arctic, it's cold, and the people are often inside and they can't go outside. And in the Yucatan, it's hot and people live their lives outside, and yet the parents really are doing many of the same things and have this style of parenting that was really similar. And when I got back, I started reading and I realized actually there's this common approach to parenting that you can find all over the world. And it used to be really common in the US, in parts of Europe. And I wanted to learn it because I figured out that it's really an approach that parents have turned to for thousands and thousands of years. It's likely the way kids were raised, when humans were evolving, tens of thousands, even like 100,000 years ago. And when you see it in action, you're just kind of like, that's the way it should be done. And you start to see that we do it really kind of ineffectively and in a way that's really exhausting. And so this book is about me and Rosie, my daughter. She was 3 at the time. We go back to the Yucatan, we go back to the Arctic, and we go to the Tanzanian Savanna with a group called the Hadzabe, this hunter-gatherer group. And they teach me and Rosie, the parents there, teach us about this approach to parenting, about how you can raise helpful kids, you can raise kids that are calm and can control their emotions, and you can raise confident, self-sufficient kids, so without all the anxiety and depression that we struggle with here.
Oh my God, what an amazing experience for you and Rosie. And thank you so much for also just like sharing this with the world, right? And not keeping it to yourself. So I really, really am grateful for that. So I guess like my question is, in the end, like as any parent, like we all want to do the right thing by our children, right? So even like with us all getting it wrong, it happens while we're trying to get it right and try to create a communication or bond or whatever. Of course, our own, personal baggages and things might reflect into the parenting, but the intentions are possibly like pretty universal. So how do you think we got here? Where did that like gap start to happen? Where these like years and years of tradition of like collaborative family dynamics really is what it is, turned into this, I don't want to say dictators, but really like more like top down, and not necessarily just providing guidance, but almost at a point like we're ruling their lives. And how did this happen over time?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, it is kind of a dictatorship if you look at the difference in the way that the parents in a lot of places raise kids. We are kind of these little dictators because we really think we are supposed to have so much control over children's lives. And we know what's best for them, right? Parents know what's best. And I think parents in a lot of places think they have good ideas about what's best. And there's at times they know what's best. But a lot of the book is about kind of learning to value and look to your child for guidance when it comes to their parenting, and kind of this idea that kind of the child knows themselves better than you do. And so where did this kind of shift happen? I think a lot of stuff has come together to create this. It's a very complex answer. One of the most interesting facets, I think, is, so if you look around the world, like you say, parenting is very collaborative, and there's a lot of good evolutionary biology and primatology to support the idea that one thing that makes us human, and which has made Homo sapiens, the species Homo sapiens, so successful, is that we parent cooperatively, right? That it's not just a mom taking care of a baby or a mom and dad taking care of a baby, but we've evolved to have 4 or 5 or 6 even, people, caretakers, people who know the child just as well as the mom or dad. And that, if you look, that's probably the only way that kids survived like 100,000 years ago, was to have these extra hands. One of the primatologists has done like the kind of calorie analysis and shown that like a mom and a dad together just could not provide the calories for a child on their own. But also children are born incredibly premature, and human children require this enormous amount of support and help that no other babies in the world really, primates in the world require. And so extra hands are absolutely necessary. And when we have the nuclear family, parents, moms and dads are doing the tasks that really like 5 or 6 people are supposed to be doing and were designed to do. And if you look around the world, that's how it's usually done. It's, you've got a mom, a dad, you've got a neighbor, you've got a grandma, aunt, uncle, older kids are involved, cousins. And there's been a lot of analysis that I think, like typically in hunter-gatherer communities, the mom does about 20% when the child is 2, and that like steadily declines over time.
Wow.
So the mom is doing very small amount of the actual caretaking. And so where this change happened, it's very interesting. This one researcher at Harvard believes that it started about 500 AD. So what is that, about 1600 years ago? The Catholic Church in Europe became obsessed with incest, and they started to enact these laws so back then, communities in Europe lived like a lot of communities do today, in these big groups, big extended families. So, 10, 15 people kind of living in one house or one compound and helping each other with their children. But the Catholic Church decided that, cousins shouldn't marry cousins, which is totally reasonable. Cousins probably shouldn't marry cousins for biological reasons. But then they started enacting all these other laws, like second cousins, third cousins, fourth cousins. And I think after like a few hundred years, they were up to like 6 cousins shouldn't marry each other, in-laws shouldn't marry each other. And what this did, which there's no reason why you can't marry an in-law, you're not biologically related, and the 6th cousin too. We're probably 6 cousins, right? Like, it's very far apart. But what this did was it really shattered the extended family. And he does this analysis where he can see, like, as time goes on, the family becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. And you end up kind of where we are today, where people live kind of 2 by 2, so to speak. And you now not only don't have the help that, kids require, but you've also lost the teachers. Right. So when you live in a big group with a grandma, an aunt, even a neighbor or a friend, those older adults are teaching the younger new moms and dads how to do it. And so when we lost the extended family, we lost the teachers, we lost valuing the teachers, and we really lost the skills. Parenting is really a skill that you learn. That's a long answer.
No, that's an amazing answer. And it's so, and so this happened, and then we're not only then like 2 people are responsible by one child, but sometimes even like multiple children. And like, to add to that, like everything that is going on in the world that is parallel, competition in like workforce maybe increased, we're demanded more by our jobs too. And things got really expensive, like all these like extra added stress, which could, potentially also could change from like rural to urban, but like
Right.
I'm sure there's like levels of many other things happening in the world that sort of puts all these pressures on the parents. And so we just became like short fused, right? Like we
Yeah.
couldn't take it, I guess.
Yeah, and you're right. Like the way we've set it up makes it really hard for the parent, right?
Right.
By separating children, the child world from the adult world, like, right? So having this idea that children can't be with you when you work, right, is really hard, right? Like
Yeah.
now you have to juggle childcare and your job and, everything with family. And before it all was mixed together, right? The children were around you when you worked and they were welcome there and, they did
Yeah.
their own thing, but it was much more this like fusion and cohesion, and we've really like splintered it in a lot of ways, which you like you say, it just adds on more on top of what's already there.
Yeah, like the corporate expectations from the media. Like we were doing a lot of research on office versus home, especially starting last year, right? Because like, okay, if we're going to office less, what does that look for the design of the office? And then what does it look like for the home? And especially when the home is this blended work and school environment now, right?
Right.
And so when we were doing some like, desk research, the first like articles we were finding, like when COVID started, is like, how do you steal like 2 hours from your like children, or like where to hide at home, nothing collaborative, and very top down, nothing sustainable. Like this is not going to clearly work in the long run. And this is not a coincidence, nor it's the first time, right? Like all these expectations or pressure put on parents, especially moms, throughout the years, through like writers who write articles and don't even have any research around it, or just like stating an opinion, but they're writing for a very big publication and that's being perceived as expert advice or something. Or like, you give great examples around in the book, like how much to feed an infant, or how often to feed an infant, or sleep training, which apparently like really links to sports background, like all these like mad things we don't know. And we also are now like very short in consuming information, right? Like we read this and we take it. And we just had a great podcast on like cognitive bias and how we just like run for, and there's something called confirmation bias. And when we hear something and again, and like, oh, this must be true, so I should do that as a parent. And when the mass media and the world is feeding you, it's so hard to go against it, because then you feel like you're doing something wrong as a parent. I think what really saved me, my daughter is 3 years old. So this is like similar to when your journey started. What saved me like a year and a half ago, before I discovered your book, or even maybe it wasn't out by then, I read Unconditional Parenting. And I think that was like, that sort of gave me the awareness of like, oh, wait, like we can't follow prescriptive methods. Like no children are the same. And why aren't we treating them with respect? They're also like, I would be so annoyed as an adult if somebody cuts me off and always tells me what to do. Like it's sort of like everything that you kind of feel in your gut as a mom that doesn't sit right. Like reading that in a book was so life-saving. And then I read your book and then I'm like, yes, like we don't listen, because we live in a world where even like your pediatrician comes to you and says like, oh, did you do this by now? And you're kind of like, maybe I don't want to do it.
Right. Or I don't want to do it right now. I mean, that's one of the things. It's like this idea that children are supposed to like do things at particular ages. And if they don't, there's something wrong, or the window has closed. Like that idea is so crazy. Like no culture in the world thinks this of children. And the parents will tell me over and over again, I don't know when the kid does it. It depends on the kid. And they're like, why don't you pay attention to the child and see when they're ready for it, or like ask them, or, so there's this is a very strange thing in our culture, that there are all these norms, right? And this is very new. This is like late 19th century when people started like doing statistics on people and making like bell curves and stuff. And so now we have all these ideas of normal, not normal. And I think that puts a lot of stress on the parents, but also the children. Like, can you imagine being told, well, you're not normal, like what does, but also then we give up really easily. This is another thing. We're like, if the child doesn't do it by X, oh my God, they're never going to do it, or the child doesn't eat, I put the cauliflower in front of them 5 times and they don't eat it. Well, they don't like it. And this is parents everywhere I went talk about how things take these time, and everything is a slow process, and like learning to do chores around the house. You can't just stick a chore chart up on the wall and expect kids to do it. This is a skill. This is something that takes time. But it's interesting when you talk about the information, because once the extended family left the home, the grandma, the aunts, the neighbors, the uncles, we started to turn to these outside sources because we started not knowing what to do. And at the same time, doctors in Europe, doctors were creating these little pamphlets for hospitals, often orphanages and fondling hospitals, where they're taking care of, 100 babies and 100 toddlers at once. And so they wrote these little pamphlets, like, here's how you kind of mass parent, lots and lots of babies at once. And it's interesting because at the same time, parents they even say we're hungry for knowledge. And so they took these pamphlets for these hospitals that were often written by men who intentionally said that childcare should be taken out of the hands of women. And sometimes the men didn't even have children. The guy that wrote the sleep training that you mentioned didn't have children.
Yeah.
He was he was like a sports writer. I think he wrote like 3 books about guns. And actually blew off his like left hand or something. But he was writing baby advice too. And he's the one who was like talking about sleep, like who really first promoted sleep training. Sleep training is a very strange practice. My God. So these pamphlets, you can actually, a lot of them are in the 1800s, but you can actually see kind of how they evolved and got recycled over time into the books we have now. And it's kind of crazy to find these threads. I mean, of course they've been like modified and kind of sometimes they swing back and forth, but a lot of the data that gets cited as like, or the ideas that get cited as, evidence-based and scientifically backed actually comes from these pamphlets. And
oh my God.
I know, it's crazy, right? Like I read this book that went through the history of all this. It's a really dense book. It's called Dream Babies, but it's incredible. It really makes you stop and think, like you say, it makes you question that stuff you find on the web and in the news, and like, well, where does this actually come from? And, do I need to listen to it? And
right. And I mean, like if we were to make an analogy, like aren't things like, racism or discrimination, like things like that also just come from somebody had an idea one time and somebody else said it and somebody else echoed it. And then like we have this, and then it suddenly became the norm, right? I mean, it is crazy how our brains, like apparently we have the tendency to do that. Like we just, see information, and if it looks legit enough, we believe it. And then we don't, investigate further because we don't have the time. And guess what? We don't have family support anymore.
Right.
So we take shortcuts. Right. And then we're like frustrated at our kid because they're not listening to us, but maybe we're not listening to them. So it's very, and I think like the self-awareness is, and we can talk about this a little bit more in depth after you go through like the cultures that you observe, but the self-awareness is so crucial. But at the same time, it's almost like as when you start like practicing as a parent, like everything you read and like what feels like what should be the normal way, you kind of immediately also recognize what you've been like geared to do for years, right? You're like fighting your inner like biases, I feel like on an ongoing basis, and recognizing that is actually really, really valuable to get started. But we can like talk about that later. And first talk about, so what did you do? So you took Rosie and you left to the rest of the world.
Yeah. So I picked the cultures because, well, first I had a lot of contact there from the trips that I'd taken, but also each one kind of does something and shines in a way when it comes to parenting that Western culture really struggles with. So the Maya are really excellent at motivating children to be helpful, getting kids to do chores around the house and without being asked, without being bribed or scolded. It's this volunteer helpfulness. And the Inuit in the Arctic have these incredible tools for teaching children executive function. So in teaching children how to regulate their emotions, how to be calm, how to kind of think before you act, right? Pause before you respond. And then the Hadzabe are world famous for raising really confident, self-sufficient kids, like none of that anxiety and depression that we struggle with, especially in the US, is there. We saw a little 5-year-old girl who, helped, very good at helping to take care of her brother, but also, could forage for lunch and help prepare the lunch, and not doing it because she felt like she had to, not doing it because she was stressed out about it, but doing it because she genuinely wanted to and felt pride in it. And so the book, How to Gather Parent, kind of goes through each of these cultures in our visits and kind of gives you the tools to try, here in Europe or in the US, based on me trying them and also my friends trying them and kind of seeing, which ones really kind of work in this different environment. But I had to say that, like, all the things in the book I saw everywhere, which kind of shows you that you can move them around and they still work, because they really deal a lot with the parent-child relationship. The book is really about changing the parent-child relationship, kind of what you already said, from like controlling, like either the parent's controlling the child or the child's controlling the parent, to this more collaborative framework where you're working together. And what I have found is that it builds this wonderful connection with your child, that when you really collaborate with somebody, like at work, when you really collaborate with somebody, it's this wonderful bond, and it's a very joyful experience to collaborate. And it has made Rosie and I's relationship just so wonderful. I love being with her because we collaborate better than really anyone else I know, because we've been practicing it so much.
Yeah. And I think, what is important to understand, I guess for anybody who did not read the book too, like, of course, when the context changes, how you might like do in your own household, or even your like family dynamics at your own culture might change, right? So like an immediate example, like I remember from the book where I think it was in the Arctic that, the kids just leave the house and like go to the market and come back. And like, I live in New York, try doing that in New York, or you live in San Francisco, try doing that in San Francisco, right? Like some things obviously does not make sense when you switch the context. But I think the overall themes there, that, the emphasis on collaboration, the emphasis on, just let them in, they don't have to do a perfect job, or, you don't have to be like over expecting things from the children. Just have them be part of the family and part of the things on a day-to-day, so that they don't see it as chores, right? Like that's just like one overall theme that like really stuck with me. And the way you also like talk about, I think that was like really, really interesting. Like you talked about in like the Arctic experience, how you didn't hear anybody yelling, and like yelling or like showing anger was found childish in adults. So it like makes me think that, oh wow, like we're all like grown children.
Yes,
like,
we're all, to the Inuit, we European Americans are actually very immature adults. And
maybe so,
we are in some ways. I mean, I think we are mature in other ways, but there's a lot of historical documentation that when white people first went to the Arctic, one time, there's one documentation, I've never said this before, this is going to make people mad, but some of the Inuit families thought that like white people descended from dogs. Oh my God. Because dogs can't control their anger, right? They like bark. So this is not a secret. They definitely, and the moms knew, like not only could I not control my anger towards Rosie, I couldn't control Rosie. It was just like complete hot mess. But the thing is I'm 44 now, and I'm not perfect at controlling my anger. Rosie will tell you, but I have gotten so much better at it, even at 40, when I was 40. So this is definitely a skill you can learn. People often ask me, does the book work on teenagers or 12-year-olds? And I'm like, yes, the book works on 40-year-olds. So like, it's definitely something you can learn. You're not stuck at all. But I think you brought up this really amazing point, that one of the key things that we do that makes our lives really exhausting, and at first it sounds like it doesn't, and I think that's why we're bought into it, is this is that we don't let children into our world, right? So we're doing chores, we're doing the dishes, we're doing the laundry. A young child comes over and maybe, starts throwing, there's actually a study on this. It's really incredible that, they asked European American moms what they would do in this situation. And they asked Maya moms what they would do in this situation. So you're doing the laundry and a little 2-3-year-old comes over and starts throwing the clothes around the room. Like, what do you do? And what does it mean? And the European American mom says, well, I get mad, like she's making a mess. And, and I tell her, I'm doing the laundry now, go play. Right. And so this very the motivation of the child is kind of bad. Like she wants to make a mess. She wants to play. And then 2, the action is to push her away, right? To exclude her from the task, and separate her from you in your world. And then the Maya mom says, well, I'm kind of upset because she's making a mess, but I'm also really excited because she's showing interest in the chore. And this is her way of trying to help. It's just that she doesn't know how. And so I would try to guide her, the clothes go in the basket and now we put them in the wash. And so you see a couple of things different. Like one, the mom sees the motivation as good, right? That the child wants to help. And I think this is a key thing, that we often view children's motivations kind of nefariously as like pushing our buttons, wanting to make a mess, and a lot of parents around the world see children especially young children, as genuinely wanting to help and not knowing how. And so the action then is pro-social, right? She lets the child help. She welcomes the child in and starts to teach the child the chore. And so you can see, like, over time, like even after 4 or 5 years, the kid not only is still helping because it's fun and it's been like, a fun activity that they're doing with your mom, but also the child has learned how to do the chore, right? She knows how to do the laundry. And this is how you create this like 12-year-old who wakes up and does the dishes. This is just what she's always done, right?
Because she doesn't see it as a chore, right?
That's right.
Nor like an activity that she was pushed out of. I think to your point, how you do not get mad over time is like when you change the mindset, right? And you're kind of like change perspective and how you're looking at the event altogether, you wouldn't get mad anyway. I mean, I think you also talk about like, if they're really doing a mess or if it's a safety concern, they slowly they don't necessarily do like go, but they slowly like pull them away from the activity.
Discourage it. Yes,
exactly.
Yes.
So but then because the mindset is different, they still know it's not something to get angry of, right? I think that's
the mindset is huge, right? The shift in I even said to one of the moms in the Arctic, I was talking about trying to get Rosie to not hit me. And I said, well, she's just pushing my buttons. And the mom laughed at me. She's like, she's not pushing your buttons. She's like 2 or 3. Like, she doesn't understand what that means. She's just really clumsy. She doesn't have understanding. A lot of times the parents would say that she doesn't have understanding. And so a lot of parents around the world see children as kind of these illogical, irrational creatures that don't know yet. They don't have understanding.
And they're devious, right? Let me push my mom.
Exactly. And this is another good example of something we read and hear and we think, oh, it must be true because it comes from psychologists. There's no data, right? There's no study showing that the child is intentionally trying to hurt you, right? Like, a child doesn't even understand that really, right? Like, I even asked like a 6-year-old once about it. Like, how do you think that makes me feel, what you just did? Oh, makes you feel sad. Were you trying to make me feel sad? No, I wasn't trying, you can even test out this idea. But this is complete folklore. This is something that parents, I don't know when they made it up, but they made it up. And it's made our lives really hard because it makes us have all this anger towards children, right? Because if you think someone's manipulating you and pushing your buttons, you're going to act defensively and adversarially to them. And then all you're doing is getting the kid to be angry back, right? And do the same, right? So the moms in the Arctic and the dads really taught me okay, if I think of her as just trying hard and that she loves me, then I have more empathy towards her, more compassion when she does something wrong. And I try to say, oh, she just doesn't understand. And it's my job to show her, the right way. And yelling at her and getting mad is just showing her to yell and get mad. So I'm not perfect with it, but I can say that when my response to Rosie changed, Rosie's behavior changed really quickly and improved like so much.
Right. And I think like you do, like, obviously when you start sensing even like the shift of a little bit, even like how you feel about it. Like, I don't think any mom feels good about themselves after they yell at their children, right? Like, it just doesn't sit right. Like, you just do it because it comes like a reflex, or you're told to do so because we're so big on self-discipline and all of the above. But I like my initial, like, I remember when I was pregnant, when I was asking all moms like advice, right? Just like hearing what they would say. And then I remember this one mom telling me like, happy mom, happy child. And so like, that was, I think, the one that stuck with me most. Like, if you have a more calm, relaxed, and content attitude, that only could like reflect on you. And that was like the best advice I ever got. And I think, you know, that advice sort of, even like that on its own went a long way when like I started to like face conflicts. But I think it's so interesting how we're wired. Like, so I like that advice went a long way for me, but I still, I think because we're, again, like to your point, are raising much more alone compared to how we were doing, looked for that validation in books. And when I don't see that, that was like, am I doing the right thing? Like my daughter Ada, she went through a phase where she was like hitting me, and I never felt angry because I just thought like, oh, she's frustrated. She can't express herself because she didn't develop language yet. So I just should try to understand her. But I would get so much feedback on like, you should discipline her, or like say no, because she's going to make a habit. But it never sat right. And then when I started to like see books that actually like, and like yours, that was kind of like, no, like that's a phase and there's no point of being angry about it. I was like, oh my God, okay. You know, we seek that validation. And I think that's understandable, how looking back on like how we were raising children, right? Like we were raising children as a community. So it wasn't just on us. So when we're left alone, we're kind of seeking these like, I don't know, I guess that sort of also led to the flip side of the coin, right? Like we took advice from sports trainers.
Right, exactly. No, there's all these holes, right? There's all these like, am I doing it right? Is this right? You know, it's interesting at the end of the book, I actually had this Inuit mom, this amazing woman, Corinna Kramer. I acknowledge her at the end. She read the whole book, and I wanted just like, you know, feedback and sensitivity. And she kind of said to me at the end, she really liked it. She really loved it. She sent it to her daughters. But she said at the end, she was like, I really think all you need to do. She was like, the book is great, but this is all you need to do. She's like, all you need to do is really think like, well, what I'm about to do or say to my child, or will it hurt our relationship or will it help our relationship? And I know it's so simple, but like, you know, and she said, you know, sometimes that means saying like, I need quiet time, or I need you to not hit me. You know, you can't hit me. That, you know, sometimes it's about like saying what you need, because that's what you need to keep the relationship good, you know? But I think it speaks to what you just said, right? Because it's like, you knew what was right for the child and what was right for your relationship, right? And at the end of the day, we can follow that rule. Like, is it going to hurt the relationship? Is it going to help the relationship? And oftentimes it means doing kind of nothing, right? Just like you said, like waiting, right? Like you're like, it's a phase, it's temporary. And a lot of the parents told me these types of things, like, well, she's just not ready, or they're just not ready. Give it more time. And we want to fix things like right away. And oftentimes the kid can just fix it themselves if we wait a bit, as I say in the book, right? Just wait a bit, you know?
We're the instant gratification generation. I think that's also like the big problem to it. But I think like when we want to address sort of like, how might we like approach these like dilemmas or issues that we see in like parenting or in like mass media, one, like in the end, like I think that one liner is amazing to just like remember, like, does it hurt or help? And that is, you can be wherever in the world, whatever type of family, that's like something that is universal. And also, if you have these like different opinions, or like, I don't think everybody can do what you did, right? Like go into the depth and I'm gonna figure this out and like have this immersive experience, which is amazing. And I'm so glad you did it for other moms. But I think for all moms to be okay with like feeling different too, I guess like one thing we should like echo, just because you're bombarded by like saying, oh, did you sleep train, or did you discipline in that, or is he like potty trained yet, or is she doing that? All of these pressures from the society. I feel like we just need to sort of like learn to dial it down.
I mean, and it's one of the things that's really strange. So I don't know if you when you read the book, there's this whole idea that, right, that European heritage people do these very weird things, right? We have all these like weird psychologies.
Weird
yeah, and we have all this weird parenting. And one of the weird things about us is that we highly value and really care about strangers' opinions and acquaintances, right? So people that we don't know super well, right? Like colleagues at work, people that we vaguely know, neighbors, like we value their opinions way higher than most people in the world. Most people in the world don't care about these people's opinions at all. Like they care about their close friends, they care about what their family thinks, but otherwise it's like, but we really care what like these people we don't know think. And I've started like thinking of that when I'm trying to do what you say, like kind of have a spine and be like, hey, I know what's right for my kid versus this blogger or this journalist or this person at work, or I mean, it's really hard when it's the pediatrician. That's like the hardest because but I mean, that's why learning the history of that advice is so important, because then a lot of that stuff that the pediatrician says comes from these pamphlets, right? And but that's a hard thing, right? To really kind of be confident in, and that, right, that when it feels right and when it's working, that's what I really like have come to understand, that if it works, there's less conflict in the home, there's less arguing, the behavior is better. Well, I'm not going to change that, right? Like that's all I need, right? The proof is in the pudding, kind of.
Exactly. And you kind of have finding your own ad hoc solutions, your own family and culture and context, really.
Yeah. And I think the book is a lot about like opening up the view and being like, because for me, a lot of the tools that I read about didn't work, right? I just felt very frustrated by them.
Yeah.
So it's like opening up the toolbox and saying, there's lots of ways to do it. Try it and see if it works, modify it. Like, and like you said, it might work differently with different kids even, right? And
exactly.
But at the end of the day, it's like, is the relationship better? Do you feel more peace? Do you feel more connection? That's what the barometer, right? I think. And I have to say, I've been like applying it to my marriage, like right, like this idea, like and it's not about not saying something to somebody or not doing something, but it's like, okay, can I do it in a way that's going to help versus cause conflict and hurt, and like just kind of pausing a bit and thinking, okay, let me see if I can do this in a way that's going to be kind.
Yeah, you just started to wait a bit in any dynamic. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
That's awesome. I think it's an amazing segue to advices too. I think you gave many great advices like throughout the conversation. But to like add to that a little bit, what you did here also was like you weren't happy with what you were experiencing at home.
Yeah.
And you wanted to make it better, right? And then you just went out of your way. And what the part I love about most is like, actually you did it with Rosie, right? Like it was super collaborative, the way you even like investigated it. So, and that's fascinating. And to me, it's like almost a great analogy to anybody who wants to like do something, in a field that they're not super happy about, if they want to change the industry and all of those. Like what you did is like really interesting. So to anyone who is sort of like, well, really getting out of your comfort zone to like fix something or like change something in their lives, what would your advice be to them?
I think what I've realized in the last like 3 or 4 years, which has really kind of blown my mind and really changed my life, is that a lot of the stuff that we think is like normal or is omnipresent, is ubiquitous, it has to be that way, so a lot of this for me, it was parenting, like the stuff that I thought you just had to do, you have to say that everybody does it that way. Really in any field, I think those things are culture. They're culturally based, you know, and that if you go outside kind of the Western paradigm and have an open mind about it, and like, you know, you have to kind of get over your biases of, you know, they live a very different, people live a very different way, they act a very different way. But if you kind of recognize that there could be something better, you know, and like, if you go outside that Western paradigm and start looking for other ways of doing things, it's like a gold mine of ideas. I mean, that's really what I found was like, if I go outside Western culture, there's just like this huge Grand Canyon of parenting approaches that many of them really work. Right. And so I've started to kind of I've been doing this more in psychology too. Like every time we do like a story on psychology, I think we'll, you know, what would like, you know, Chinese, how does the like Chinese psychologist view this? Or, you know, what is a Latino psychologist? How, you know, what's the view from there? And you and you start to see like, whoa, like not only are we not doing it the way everyone else does it, but oftentimes we're not doing it the best. We're not doing it the most effectively. And I think we tend to, as Westerners and Europeans, we tend to kind of think we're kind of the end all be all to things, you know, because we do have these incredible tools and we've, you know, done incredible things that other cultures haven't done, but we're not, you know, we're not doing things the best, you know.
And just because we evolved in some things doesn't mean we evolved in everything, right?
Exactly. In fact, we've kind of lost a lot of things that were, you know, I mean, I have this directory on my computer called Lost, and it's basically all these things that we've lost when we've, you know, given up a certain lifestyle for another one. Right. That's my advice is like, maybe question kind of some of your assumptions, the things that you just take for granted. Like, well, I have to do that. Well, do you have to? Do you have to do that? And does everybody have to? Does everyone do it? You know.
I love that so much. And if we raise our children with that mindset too, I think like generations from now will be in much better state, all of us. In both families and really like business life and all together.
Yeah, because we do have problems, right? We struggle in areas and other people don't, right? So
yeah. This was so great, Michaeleen. I'm so happy to like have this conversation. I'm gonna just echo again, anybody who hasn't read the book, you don't even have to be a parent. It's just like a great example of like journalism coming to life, but also it's really eye-opening and how we would also perceive ourselves as adults. And also if you are a parent, it's just like super helpful in just shifting your mindset and having a just better life at home because of it. So thank you so much for making the time. I'm so glad I got to see Rosie too. So she's been amazing. Like
she's still here. Thank you.
I really appreciate her patience. Thank you. And thank you. We'll be in touch soon.
Okay. Thank you. Have a great weekend.
And that is this week's episode of What's Wrong with the Podcast. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcasting platform. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Links can be found in the episode description, and you can also find them on our website, podcast.what'swrongwith.xyz. If you found value in the show, we would appreciate if you could rate us and leave a review, or you can simply tell your friends about us. For more details on our guests, follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Don't forget to join us next week. Thank you for listening.